I stood in the back row of the cathedral, the scent of polished wood and incense heavy in the air, as the choir's voices rose above the hushed crowd. People whispered about legacy, about what would happen next, but no one whispered my name. Not once. This was the funeral of Richard Halloran, founder, CEO, visionary, and, to me, the only person in that company who had ever looked past appearances and politics. Richard had been more than just a boss. He was a mentor, a protector, someone who had told me quietly over coffee late one night, "Amy, you see what others miss. Don't let them convince you otherwise." Now he was gone, lowered into the ground with lilies on his casket, and in the front row sat his son, Daniel, surrounded by board members dressed in black. Their faces were masks of grief, carefully arranged for appearances, but I could see the calculation behind their eyes. To them, Richard's death wasn't just tragedy. It was an opening. Everyone assumed Daniel would inherit control. His jaw was set as if he were already wearing his father's crown. Whispers rippled through the cathedral. The transition will be smooth. The company will stay in the family. No one questioned it. No one looked at me. I kept my eyes down, my hands folded in silence. Because what they didn't know, what I couldn't reveal, not yet, was that Richard's final decision had changed everything. The memory of that night came back to me with brutal clarity. A week before his heart failed, Richard had called me into his office. The lights were dim, his voice weaker than usual, but steady. He slid a sealed envelope across the oak desk. "Amy," he said, "there will be chaos when I'm gone. You've seen how they circle. That's why I'm leaving this to you." My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was his notarized will. My name stared back at me in black ink. Richard had not left control to his son. He had named me Amy Clark, the majority heir. I had looked at him, stunned. "Why me?" I whispered. "Because," he said, eyes burning even in his frailty. "You'll protect what I built. They'll underestimate you, Amy. That's your advantage." Now, standing at the back of his funeral, I heard his words again. They echoed through the cathedral louder than the organ. The board shifted in their seats, already whispering, already planning. Let them. The week that followed blurred into polite condolences and hushed conversations in glass offices I was suddenly excluded from. Emails went unanswered. Meetings were moved without me. By Friday afternoon, I was summoned to the executive conference room. The air inside smelled faintly of leather and stale coffee. The board sat in a neat row, Daniel at the head of the table, his mouth curled into something between a smile and a sneer. "Amy," the chairman began, voice dipped in false sympathy. "We've reviewed operations in light of recent changes. Unfortunately, we've decided your role has been made redundant, effective immediately." The words landed like stones. Once they would have broken me. Years ago, I might have begged, argued, pleaded to stay, but now all I felt was a strange calm. I smiled, just slightly. "I understand. Thank you for the opportunity." For a moment, silence hung in the room. They hadn't expected composure. They had expected tears, outrage, humiliation. Instead, I stood, gathered my belongings, and walked toward the door. "Security will escort you out," one of them said quickly, as though afraid I might lash out. In the elevator, my reflection stared back at me. Tired eyes, set jaw, lips curved into the faintest of smiles. They think I'm finished. How fun Monday would be. That night, in my small apartment, I placed the cardboard box of personal belongings on the floor. A photo of my mother. A pen I'd kept since my first day. A mug with a chipped handle. None of it mattered. The real inheritance, the one no one suspected, was locked safely in my desk drawer. The will. Richard's final signature. His trust in me. His belief that I could hold steady where others would falter. As I sat alone in the quiet, grief surged through me. Not for the job, not for the titles they stripped away, but for Richard himself. He had seen me when no one else did. When promotions passed me over, when my ideas were stolen, when I was told to smile more if I wanted to get ahead. Richard saw me. And now he had given me the one thing they could never take back: control. I poured a glass of wine, staring out at the city lights. Somewhere across town, the board was celebrating my departure, congratulating themselves on saving money, already dividing up what they thought was theirs. Let them laugh. Let them believe they'd erased me. Because by Monday morning, the truth would hit them like a storm. The offices they claimed as theirs, they were already mine. And this was only the beginning. The weekend stretched ahead of me like a quiet storm waiting to break. For the first time in years, I didn't have to set an alarm for Monday morning, didn't have to iron a blouse, didn't have to paste on a polite smile in the elevator. I should have felt lost. Instead, I felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. Still, the silence in my apartment was heavy. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues. Some polite, some not so polite. "Amy, I'm so sorry. I heard they let you go. The board toasted to you being dead weight at the club last night. Daniel's bragging about streamlining operations." I read them all slowly, letting the words sink in. Dead weight, streamlining, celebrating. They had no idea. Not yet. On Saturday morning, I brewed a fresh pot of coffee and pulled Richard's will from the drawer. The document was heavy in my hands, the notarized seal catching the light. I traced my name on the page. The letter's still unreal. He hadn't left it to Daniel. He hadn't left it to the board. He'd left it to me. A voice echoed in my head. Richard's voice, soft but certain. "They'll underestimate you, Amy. That's your advantage. Let them move first. Then strike," that became my mantra. By midday, the arrogance of the board was already spilling into the open. Nell, one of the few colleagues I trusted, sent me a message. "They're planning to sell off one of the smaller divisions. Bryce is already talking about taking over Operations Perfect. The more reckless they became, the easier it would be to show investors the truth." But doubt crept in that evening as I sat in my quiet living room. Could I really face them? Men twice my age, polished in politics and manipulation, all convinced I was nothing but a disposable pawn. I thought about the times I had been talked over in meetings, when my ideas were credited to someone else, when I stayed late fixing problems others caused only to watch them promoted. The anger steadied me. Richard hadn't chosen me out of pity. He had chosen me because he knew I had the patience to wait and the foresight to plan. Saturday night, my phone rang. An unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Amy," a familiar voice said, smug and drawn out. It was Bryce, one of the oldest board members. "I heard about your situation. Tough break. But look, if you're looking for opportunities, I can put in a word elsewhere. We have to look out for each other, right?" I almost laughed out loud. Instead, I kept my tone flat. "That's generous of you." He chuckled. "Anyway, exciting times ahead. You know, fresh leadership, bold moves. Maybe I'll even be running things soon." "Congratulations, Bryce," I said softly. "I'm sure it'll be memorable." When I hung up, I couldn't stop smiling. He had no idea that by Monday, his words would come back to haunt him. On Sunday morning, I took a different step. I met with Emily Chen, the lawyer Richard had insisted I bring into confidence months ago. Sharp eyes, calm demeanor, the kind of professional who could dismantle a contract line by line. She reviewed the will again carefully, running her finger along the notarized seal. "It's airtight," she said, her voice steady. "They can try to challenge it, but with this documentation, the notary, the witnesses, the physician's statement confirming Richard was of sound mind, they won't get far." I exhaled, tension I hadn't realized I was carrying slipping from my shoulders. "Patience," Emily said, echoing Richard's words. "Don't rush. Let them make mistakes. When you strike, make it final." That night, I sat by the window of my apartment looking out at the city lights. Across town, I imagined the board laughing over their glasses of whiskey, congratulating each other for cutting costs, for finally putting me in my place. They thought Monday would be their victory lap. Instead, Monday would be the day they learned who truly held control. I poured myself a glass of wine and whispered Richard's words into the night. They'll underestimate you. That's your advantage, and they already had. By the time I went to bed, the doubt had faded. The fear had quieted. All that was left was the steady hum of anticipation. Tomorrow, I wouldn't walk into that building as an employee. I would walk in as the owner. And that thought carried me through the night. Monday morning came earlier than I expected. I woke before the alarm, the apartment silent except for the hum of the city outside. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to rush. No hurried coffee, no checking emails before the elevator ride, no forced smiles in the lobby. Today was different. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat on my balcony, watching the streets below fill with people hurrying to jobs they hated. Across town, the board was likely already gathered in the executive conference room, congratulating themselves on streamlining operations. They thought I'd disappear quietly into unemployment, maybe beg for a reference, maybe fade into obscurity. Instead, I held something they couldn't even imagine. Control. By 8:30 a.m., I was dressed in a navy suit, understated, sharp, nothing flashy. I needed to look like what I was. Calm, prepared, inevitable. I slipped Richard's notarized will into my briefcase alongside Emily Chen's cover letter, citing my legal rights as majority heir. When I arrived at the building, security hesitated. After all, I'd been terminated. But when I handed them the sealed envelope with Emily's letterhead, their faces changed instantly. Within minutes, I was being escorted upstairs, not as an employee, but as something none of them had grasped yet. The boardroom was exactly as I remembered. Polished mahogany table, leather chairs, a wall of glass overlooking the skyline. The men around the table looked up in surprise as I entered. "What is she doing here?" Bryce muttered, his brow furrowing. I set my briefcase down gently, letting the silence stretch. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said evenly. "I believe I have every right to be here." The chairman cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "Amy, this meeting is for board members only. As you know, your employment was terminated last week." Without a word, I slid the folder across the table. "Then you'll want to read this." Confusion flickered across his face as he opened it. His eyes scanned the notarized signatures, the legal seals, Richard's handwriting. His expression shifted from disbelief to something close to panic. The others leaned in, murmuring, their voices sharp whispers as they flipped through the pages. This can't be real," the chairman finally stammered. "It's very real," I replied calmly. 3 days before his death, Richard Halloran signed over his majority stake to me. That makes me the controlling shareholder of this company. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioning. Then Bryce slammed his fist on the table. "This is outrageous. You expect us to believe he'd hand control to you, of all people?" I met his glare without flinching. "Believe whatever you want. The paperwork is valid, witnessed, notarized, and already filed. I've spoken with my attorney. As of this moment, your authority is subject to my approval." The room erupted. Half the board began whispering frantically, while others rifled through the documents as if hoping to find a mistake. Bryce's voice cut through the noise, harsh and bitter. "She's bluffing. She has no experience, no standing. Richard would never trust her with this." "Funny," I said softly, leaning forward. "Because he did. And unlike you, Bryce, he valued results over politics." His face reddened. "You think you can just walk in here and take over?" "I don't think," I answered, my voice steady. "I know." The chairman raised a hand, trying to regain control. "Even if this arrangement is valid, surely you understand the challenges. Investors, clients, employees. This revelation could destabilize everything." I let the words hang for a beat before replying. "Destabilize or restore confidence?" Because let's be clear, without Richard, your house of cards was already collapsing. Declining margins, restless investors, deals slipping away. You've been painting over cracks while the foundation rotted. Richard knew it. That's why he chose me. The truth of my words silenced them more than the documents had. They knew I was right. Numbers didn't lie. Just then, my phone buzzed on the table. I let it ring, deliberately leaving the screen face up. The name flashing across it was one they all recognized. Anderson Holdings, our largest institutional investor. The timing couldn't have been better. "Excuse me," I said, answering the call in full view of the board. "Yes, this is Amy Clark." "Of course, I'll meet with you this afternoon. We'll discuss the company's future." I ended the call and set the phone down slowly. "They already know," I said quietly, "and they're ready to talk." The look on Bryce's face was priceless. A mix of shock and fear, the first cracks in his arrogance finally showing. For the next hour, the board scrambled, questioning the legality, arguing technicalities, trying to delay the inevitable. I answered each point calmly, citing the legal validations Emily had prepared. They could fight, they could stall, but they couldn't undo the fact. I was the majority shareholder. Finally, I stood, gathering my papers. "Gentlemen, I'll give you the rest of the day to adjust to the new reality. Tomorrow morning, we'll reconvene to discuss restructuring properly this time." Without waiting for a response, I left the boardroom. Outside, assistants and staff lined the hallway, pretending not to eavesdrop. Their eyes followed me as I walked past. I offered a small, calm smile. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of power settle into place. Not revenge, not yet. Something larger. Richard's words echoed in my mind. "They'll underestimate you, Amy. That's your advantage," and they had. Spectacularly. By noon, the emails began. First from the company secretary, then from outside counsel. Subject lines in all caps, phrases in bold. Contest, capacity, temporary restraining order. They were going to argue Richard hadn't been of sound mind when he signed the will. I'd expected it. Emily had too. Before I could call her, my phone vibrated again. "Nell, they're telling staff you forged documents. Bryce said you preyed on a dying man. HR asked ET to pull your emails." I stopped walking, staring at the message until my reflection in the screen looked like someone else. "Are they wiping records?" I typed back. "Trying." Head of InfoSec refused without a board resolution. He asked for GC sign-off. They don't have it, small spine, big moment. I exhaled. Emily picked up on the first ring. "They'll go after capacity," she said without hello. "We prepared for this." "You have the notary, the 2 witnesses, and the physician's letter from the same week. I'm filing for a status quo order. No asset sales, no personnel changes, no material contracts until ownership is resolved." "Delaware Chancery?" I asked. "Exactly. Judges there like preserving the current state. Focus on investors. I'll handle the fire hose." The elevator in Anderson Holdings' lobby smelled faintly of metal and lemon. I arrived at 2 p.m. sharp. The receptionist's smile was professional. The conference room was glass and quiet, the skyline a steel line behind it. Victoria Hale, early 50s, composed, eyes that missed nothing, shook my hand and sat. "We want stability, Ms. Clark," she said. "Not theater. Why should we support you?" I didn't talk about Betrayal. I talked about numbers. Cash burn is up 9% year over year. Realized revenue is flat. Client churn ticked from 6 to 8.5. The board's response has been cosmetic. Headcount optics, press releases, nothing operational. My 90-day plan is simple. Freeze non-essential spend, audit every auto-renew contract, move bonuses from bookings to gross margin, and set retention triage for the top 50 clients with named owners. "And operations?" she asked. "Interim COO with P and L discipline. 2 names Richard vetted, Sheila Park, ex-Riverton, and Adrian Cole, formerly Eastmark. Both are available for short-term mandates." She didn't blink. "Governance?" Refresh 3 seats by shareholder written consent. Install an independent audit chair in 30 days. Publish segment-level disclosure on our quarterly calls. And adopt a binding say-on-pay policy. I paused. If the court grants status quo and the will stands, I'll execute on day 1. Victoria folded her hands. Deliver the consent, name the interim COO, and brief us twice weekly. If the court holds the line, you'll have a support letter by morning. The breath I'd been holding finally left. Thank you. On the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. Nell again. A photo of a white envelope taped to the boardroom door. Service of shareholder written consent stamped in blue beneath it. Then a second photo of Bryce mid-argument, lips thin, eyes hard. They're rattled, she wrote. InfoSec just locked the email purge. GC finally intervened. Back at home, an email from Emily was waiting. A scanned letter on hospital letterhead signed by Richard's physician. Patient is of sound mind and fully oriented. Cleared to execute legal decisions. We had never wanted to use it. Now it was a shield. At 6:07 p.m., a push alert hit my phone. Industry ledger exclusive, fired, VP claims majority inheritance, board shocked. A senior source called me opportunistic and unstable. The word stung once. Then the burn cooled into focus. I forwarded the article to Victoria with a single line. We will not litigate in the press. Her reply came fast. Good answer. Emily and I met at her office at 7. She slid a 3-page document across the table. Shareholder written consent, she said. Remove directors A, B, and C. Appoint independent replacements. Ratify interim operating authority pending court confirmation. Process servers go at 8:15. I read every line, then signed, careful and slow. It felt like writing on glass. Precise. Irreversible. They'll try an emergency TRO, Emily said, capping her pen. We'll be in front of a vice-chancellor at 10 a.m. I've asked for a status quo order and an instruction that no corporate action occurs without your written consent. Will we get it? We have clean facts. Judges like clean facts. On my way out, my phone rang from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Bryce's voice followed, a mix of threat and faux concern. Amy, be reasonable. This will ruin you. Come in tomorrow and we'll find you a soft landing. I forwarded it to Emily with one word. Preserve. The city had shifted into its night rhythm by the time I reached our building. Through the glass of our offices, I could see silhouettes moving in the boardroom, hands cutting the air like blades. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late fixing someone else's mess while those same silhouettes toasted each other across town. I pulled my coat tighter and kept walking. At 9:18 p.m., Nell texted. Staff rumor mill is wild. Daniel told someone you stole the company. People who ignored you for years are suddenly asking if you're hiring. I typed back, tell them to get sleep. Tomorrow is paperwork, not fireworks. It sounded like something Richard would say. I hoped he'd approve. Near midnight, I opened Richard's old notebook. He'd kept short arrows between names, shorthand so compact it looked like code. Next to Bryce. Short horizon, corner with timelines. Next to the chairman. Hates public embarrassment. Lean on process. Next to my name, one line. Steady hands. I placed the notebook beside my phone and stared at the ceiling until my heartbeat slowed to something steady, something usable. Power wasn't a roar. It was a pulse you learned to keep. At 7:02 the next morning, Emily texted. Hearing confirmed. 10 a.m., Court of Chancery. Dress plain. Speak once. Let me carry the water, I answered with a thumbs up and a single word. Ready. By 8:15, process servers had confirmed delivery. By 8:40, Anderson's draft support letter hit my inbox, conditional on status quo. At 9:03, the company secretary emailed a last-ditch request to delay any meeting pending clarity. I replied with one sentence Emily had written for me. All parties are bound to maintain the status quo pending court instruction. In the mirror, I adjusted the collar of a black jacket I'd worn to half a dozen budget meetings that never mattered. Today, it did. I wasn't walking into a fight to scream. I was walking in to hold a line. They had moved first. Now it was my turn to make it final. The courthouse steps were slick with rain that morning, the air damp and heavy. Inside, the corridors hummed with low voices and the shuffle of shoes against marble. At exactly 10 a.m., we filed into the Chancery courtroom. Emily walked ahead of me, her posture steady, every move precise. I kept my hands folded, remembering her advice. Speak once. Let me carry the water. Across the aisle sat the board's attorneys, faces drawn tight, papers spread across the table like shields. Bryce was there too, jaw clenched, whispering furiously to Daniel. They looked smaller than I remembered, as if the weight of panic had already begun to bend their shoulders. The hearing itself lasted barely 20 minutes. The board argued Richard hadn't been of sound mind when he signed the will, that I had manipulated him, that this transfer would destabilize the company. Emily rose with calm precision, citing the notarization, the physician's attestation, and 2 independent witness statements. She reminded the court that Delaware law favored preserving the status quo during disputes. The vice-chancellor leaned back, steepling his fingers. Until this matter is fully resolved, no material changes will occur without Ms. Clark's written consent. Status quo order granted his gavel came down softly, but in that moment it sounded like thunder. The board's last illusion of control shattered in a single sentence. Bryce's face went red. Daniel muttered something I couldn't hear. Emily gathered her papers without expression, but as we stepped out into the rain, she gave me the smallest nod. Clean win. Now go lead. At 11 o'clock sharp, I reconvened the board. This time, I didn't sit at the side. I sat at the head of the table. 3 new independent directors joined quietly, their presence alone enough to shift the atmosphere. The old guard glared, their outrage muted by the court order resting in my briefcase. I spoke plainly. The company belongs to its clients, its employees, and its shareholders, not to personal egos. That ends today, I turned to Bryce. Your resignation is effective immediately. Compensation frozen pending audit. His mouth opened, then closed again. Daniel looked at him, waiting for defiance, but none came. The chairman shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. For the first time in years, the room was silent, not because I had been talked over, but because they were forced to listen. By mid-afternoon, Anderson Holdings issued a statement of conditional support. Other investors followed. Staff received a company-wide email. Effective immediately, Amy Clark assumes authority as majority shareholder and interim chair. My inbox exploded with messages. Some congratulatory, some shocked, some scrambling to realign themselves. Nell's text made me laugh quietly. Never seen so many people suddenly remember your name. Yet as the day wore on and the adrenaline ebbed, I found myself sitting alone in my new office, Richard's old office, overlooking the city skyline. On the desk was a framed photo of him, smiling at a company picnic years ago. I touched the frame lightly, my throat tightening. It wasn't triumph, I felt. Not really. It was weight. Responsibility. Richard hadn't given me 51% to settle scores. He had done it because he believed I would protect what he built from being hollowed out by greed. I whispered into the quiet. I hope I did it right. The truth was, revenge had never been the goal. Justice was. And justice doesn't always look like fireworks. Sometimes it looks like patience, paperwork, and a steady hand at the table. As dusk settled, I walked the quiet halls of the building, remembering the years I had been overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. The irony wasn't lost on me. They had fired me to erase me. And in doing so, they handed me the one thing they could never take back. Control. I paused by the glass wall outside the boardroom, now empty, the city lights flickering beyond. Power wasn't loud. It wasn't fists on tables or shouting in corridors. It was a pulse, steady and quiet, waiting for the right moment to break into thunder. I locked the office door behind me that evening, the weight of the keys solid in my hand. Tomorrow would bring audits, investor calls, difficult conversations, and hard work. But for the first time, it would be on my terms. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. Lily, HR needs to see you. Those were the words my manager delivered on a Tuesday morning, his expression unreadable. My stomach dropped. I had never been called into HR before, not once in my 7 years at the company. I wasn't perfect, but inappropriate behavior? That wasn't me. I walked down the long corridor toward the HR offices, my heels echoing on the polished floor. My mind raced. Had I accidentally offended someone in a meeting? Sent an email with the wrong tone? By the time I reached the frosted glass doors with human resources printed in bold letters, my palms were damp. Inside, Iris, the HR manager, was waiting. Her smile was polite, but didn't reach her eyes. She gestured toward the chair opposite her desk. "Thank you for coming in, Lily. We need to discuss your inappropriate comment during yesterday's strategy call." I blinked. My what? She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a typed transcript with a section highlighted in neon yellow. My heart pounded as I read the words. Vulgar, dismissive remarks about our regional VP, comments about her personal life and appearance. My breath caught. "This wasn't me," I said, my voice rising despite my attempt to stay calm. "I didn't say this." I barely spoke during that call. Iris tapped her pen against the folder. "3 employees reported hearing you. They claim it happened when the video feed briefly cut out. The audio still captured everything." "That's impossible," I insisted. "Check the recording." Her expression hardened. "That segment of the recording is corrupted." My chest tightened. Conveniently corrupted. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at her. Then something clicked in my mind. This wasn't about an inappropriate comment. This was about control. I had made enemies, without meaning to. 2 weeks earlier, I had raised concerns in a department meeting about our expansion project. The data didn't look right, and I'd spoken up. My supervisor, Marissa, had smiled thinly and told me to trust leadership. Since then, the atmosphere around me had shifted. Friendly colleagues suddenly kept their distance. Information I needed was accidentally left off email threads. And now this. Before I could say anything else, the door opened without a knock. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. Evan Miller, our CEO, walked in. His presence filled the space before he even spoke. Tall, composed, his sharp eyes flicked from me to Iris. "Sir, we're in the middle of a disciplinary," Iris said quickly, smoothing the sleeve of her blazer. "Actually," Evan said, his voice calm but carrying authority that made the room shrink around him. "That's not why we're here." Iris froze. I swear the color drained from her face so fast she looked like she might faint. She reached to pull the folder back, but Evan picked it up before she could touch it. "Miss Daniels has been working directly with my office for the past month," he said, sliding into the chair next to me. Not across from me, but beside me. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "What?" I hadn't spoken to the CEO once in my entire career. Iris's voice wavered. I don't understand." "You will," he replied. Then he turned to me. "Lily, would you mind waiting outside for a moment? And on your way, please ask Lane from legal to join us. Tell her it's time for what we discussed." "What we discussed?" My mind spun. I hadn't discussed anything with him. But I nodded, stood, and left the room on shaky legs. The door clicked shut behind me. Through the frosted glass, I could see their silhouettes. Evan leaning forward, Iris recoiling back into her chair. I gripped my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Who was Lane? What plan was unfolding? My heart raced as I replayed Iris's words, the transcript, the accusations. Someone wanted me out. someone powerful. But why was the CEO stepping in on my behalf? I couldn't decide what scared me more. The accusation that could destroy my career? Or the unknown reason the most powerful man in the company had just placed himself at my side? And that, I realized, was only the beginning. Because the truth behind this HR summons was about to reveal a game being played at a level I had never imagined. I stood in the hallway outside the HR office, my pulse hammering so hard it made my vision blur. I pressed my palms against my thighs to stop them from shaking. Through the frosted glass, I could see only faint shapes. Evan leaning forward, Iris rigid in her chair. I had no idea what was happening. When I'd walked into that room minutes earlier, I was sure my career was over. Now the CEO himself had intervened, pulled up a chair beside me, and told me to fetch someone named Lane from legal. Lane. I scrolled through my contacts, searching. Nothing. My hands were trembling so much I almost dropped my phone. Just then, a text flashed across the screen from an unknown number. I hesitated. My instincts screamed to run the other way, to get as far from this building as possible. But something stronger, curiosity, maybe survival, pushed me forward. The elevator ride to the third floor felt endless. When the doors opened, a tall woman with close-cropped silver hair stood waiting outside conference room D. She extended her hand. Lane Perkins. You must be Lily. Her handshake was firm, steady, the kind of grip that said she'd seen everything and didn't scare easily. Please come in, she said. Inside, the blinds were drawn and a thick folder rested on the table. Lane sat down, motioning for me to take the seat across from her. I imagine you're confused, she said. That's one word for it, I muttered, still struggling to keep my voice steady. HR just accused me of saying something I didn't. Then the CEO shows up, and now I'm meeting with you. What's going on? Lane leaned back, studying me carefully. Let me ask you first. Have you noticed anything unusual in the last few weeks? Things that didn't feel right? I gave a humorless laugh. Unusual? You mean besides being accused of harassment out of nowhere? Yes. My supervisor has been shutting me out. Projects I used to lead, she reassigns to others. I find out about meetings after they happen. And 2 weeks ago, I raised concerns about our expansion into Southeast Asia, about the regulatory data not lining up. And since then, it's like I've been invisible. Lane nodded slowly, as if I'd just confirmed something. That matches what we've seen. For months, we've been monitoring irregularities tied to your department, budget inconsistencies, safety testing delays, suppressed reports. At first, it looked like sloppy management, but the deeper we looked, the clearer it became. This was deliberate. My skin prickled. Deliberate how? Lane slid the folder across to me. Inside were spreadsheets, emails, and internal memos with names I recognized. My supervisor, Marissa, her 2 closest allies, and even a mid-level director. The documents showed falsified compliance reports, adjusted timelines, even internal discussions about minimizing fallout if certain safety failures were discovered abroad. I flipped through the pages, my mouth going dry. This can't be real. It's very real, Lane said quietly. And your name keeps coming up. My head snapped up. What? Why me? Because you asked the wrong questions, Lane replied. You spotted issues no one else was supposed to see. They couldn't risk you taking those concerns higher, so they tried to discredit you before you could cause trouble. The fabricated transcript in HR? That was their safety net. If you became a problem, they'd have grounds to terminate you and bury your reputation. I sat back, dizzy. Pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The sudden cold shoulders, the missing meeting invites, the technical difficulty during the conference call. It hadn't been paranoia. It had been a setup. But why is the CEO involved? I asked. Why step in for me? Because you're not the only one who noticed, Lane said. A quiet audit began 3 months ago after unusual expenses appeared in the product safety budget. Evan has been personally overseeing it. When you raised concerns in that meeting, it confirmed what we already suspected. He's been waiting for the right moment to act. I pressed my hand against my forehead. So what happens now? Lane's expression softened slightly. Now we build the case. With your help, the weight of her words hit me. My whole body tensed. Why me? I asked again, though the answer was already obvious. Because you've seen it firsthand. You've lived the retaliation. Your testimony, paired with these documents, gives us something undeniable. I stared down at the folder. My name wasn't just a line on those pages. It was a target. Lane leaned forward. This isn't just about saving your job, Lily. It's about protecting the company, our clients, and, let's be blunt, people's lives. If these products hit the market the way Marissa and her team have designed them, the consequences could be catastrophic. I swallowed hard. You're asking me to go against my own boss. I'm asking you to tell the truth, Lane corrected. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, I nodded. Okay. I'll help Lane close the folder, a faint look of relief crossing her face. Good. Then it begins now. Your HR meeting isn't what it seems. It's bait. While Evan keeps them occupied, we're preparing for the next step. And it's going to be messy. The word made my stomach twist. But deep down, under the fear, something else stirred. A flicker of resolve. If they wanted to ruin me, they'd chosen the wrong person. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the yellow highlighted transcript Iris had slid across the table. The words I supposedly said. The way she looked at me like I was already guilty. And then Evan's voice, calm but heavy with meaning. That's not why we're here. By morning, I felt like my body was running on caffeine and adrenaline alone. When I got to the office, everything felt different. People stopped talking when I walked by. A few whispered. I couldn't tell if they had heard about the HR meeting or if I was just imagining it. Either way, I kept my head down. At 9:45 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Lane. Conference room E, 10 sharp. Bring your laptop. I took the longest route upstairs, my mind churning. Was this really happening? Was I really about to help expose my own boss? Lane and Evan were already in the room when I arrived. Both of them looked calm in a way that made me feel even more nervous. Sit, Evan said. He wasn't cold, but he wasn't friendly either. His tone was that of a man who had no time for wasted words. I set my laptop on the table, trying not to fidget. Lane slid a USB stick across to me. Plug this in. We need your access. My throat went dry. Access to what? Your department's shared drive, she said. Files that Marissa has locked under project permissions. You still have secondary clearance. My fingers hesitated above the keyboard. If she finds out I opened those files, she will, Evan interrupted. But by the time she does, it won't matter. The certainty in his voice was both terrifying and strangely reassuring. I swallowed, then inserted the USB and logged in. The shared drive opened. Search Asia Compliance, Lane instructed. Dozens of folders appeared. Many were innocuous, budget spreadsheets, marketing slides, but a few were tagged with innocuous names like Archive 2024 and Vendor Notes. Lane pointed. Open that one. Inside were PDFs of lab reports. I scrolled through, my stomach sinking. Failures highlighted in red. Flammability ratings, toxicity thresholds, structural tests. These are the results I tried to show in the meeting, I whispered. She told everyone they were preliminary. They weren't preliminary, Lane said flatly. They were final. I clicked another folder. This one stopped me cold. A spreadsheet filled with numbers, color-coded in green and red. At the top, the title, Risk Matrix, Market Adaptation Strategy. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lane leaned closer. Read the columns. I scanned down. The categories made my skin crawl. Projected consumer complaints, estimated injury cases, probable fatalities. Next to them were dollar figures weighing acceptable costs against expected revenue. I pushed my chair back. This is sick. Evan spoke for the first time since I'd logged in. This is fraud and negligence and criminal if regulators see it. My chest tightened. And my name is all over these files because I had access. That's why we needed you here, Lane said, her voice steady. We need your account, your testimony. Proof that you raised concerns and were silenced? I stared at the screen, fighting the urge to cry. If I do this, Marissa will destroy me. She already tried Lily, Evan said, his eyes locking on mine. She already set the trap. What you saw in HR was her endgame. The only way out is through. The words hit me like a hammer. He was right. I could walk away, resign, pretend none of this existed. But then those products would ship, and if something went wrong, I'd know I had stayed silent. I exhaled shakily. What do you need me to do? Lane slid another document across the table. A whistleblower protection agreement. Legal language guaranteeing immunity from retaliation and a continued role within the company. Sign this first, she said. Then we build the timeline. Every meeting you were excluded from, every report you flagged, every threat or retaliation. We need the story as clean as possible. I held the pen, my hand trembling. Once I signed, there was no turning back. My career would never be the same, but maybe that was the point. I put the pen to paper. Okay. Lane gave a single nod, as if she'd expected nothing else. Good. Because tomorrow, Marissa presents to the board. And you'll be in the room. The blood drained from my face. In the room? As in, Evan said, ready to confirm what she denies. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The boardroom was the last place I wanted to be. But then I thought of the spreadsheet, the red numbers, the casual math of human lives. I tightened my grip on the pen. Then let's do it. Lane gathered the papers calmly, as though this were just another Tuesday. Evan stood, buttoning his jacket. Be ready, Lily. Tomorrow, everything changes. I watched them leave, the door clicking shut behind them. Alone in the silent room, I stared at my reflection in the dark computer screen. I wasn't just fighting for my job anymore. I was fighting for the truth. The next morning felt like walking into a storm I couldn't see but could sense in the air. My coffee tasted bitter. My hands trembled when I tried to hold my notes, and every corridor in the office seemed unusually quiet, as though people were waiting for something to happen. At 10 a.m., Lane appeared outside my cubicle. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. Boardroom. Now I followed her to the executive floor, where the glass doors and leather chairs looked like they belonged to another world. My heels clicked on the marble floor as we passed assistants whispering into headsets. Lane opened the heavy wooden doors to the boardroom and gave me a look that was equal parts reassurance and warning. Inside, the room was already full. 12 board members sat around the massive table, papers neatly stacked in front of them. Evan stood at the head of the table, his presence commanding but controlled. And there, at the far end, was Marissa. She looked flawless, as always, hair perfectly styled, cream-colored suit pressed to perfection, a faint smile playing on her lips. She didn't acknowledge me as I slipped quietly into a seat at the back. To her, I wasn't supposed to exist today. Thank you all for coming, she began, projecting confidence. I'll be presenting the progress of our Asian expansion strategy. Her voice was smooth, her slides polished, her delivery calculated. She clicked through revenue projections, growth curves, partnership opportunities. Anyone who didn't know better would have believed every word, but I knew better. My palms dampened as she shifted to compliance. As you can see, we are on track to meet all regulatory benchmarks ahead of schedule, she said, gesturing at a chart with upward lines. A knot tightened in my chest. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. One of the board members, Graham, cleared his throat. And what about the safety tests? We've heard concerns raised by the regional offices. Marissa didn't miss a beat. Preliminary tests suggested delays, but subsequent testing confirmed full compliance. There's no cause for concern. The room hummed with quiet nods. She was pulling it off, until Evan raised a hand. Before we move on, there are additional attendees joining us today. The doors opened. 3 unfamiliar faces entered: a Japanese regulator, a Taiwanese safety board representative, and a South Korean consumer protection official. My breath caught. I hadn't known they'd be here. Neither had Marissa, judging by the sudden stiffness in her shoulders. What a surprise, she said smoothly, though her voice carried the faintest tremor. We welcome your expertise. The regulators nodded politely, but their eyes were sharp, watchful. Marissa clicked forward to another slide, speaking faster now, glossing over details. She was trying to stay ahead, but the questions started almost immediately. Your timeline assumes expedited approval, Miss Chen from Taiwan said, adjusting her glasses. On what basis? Our North American certifications, Marissa replied. Those standards are not equivalent, Mr. Park from South Korea said, his tone cool. Beads of sweat appeared at Marissa's temple. Before she could respond, Lane stood from her chair at the side of the room. With the board's permission, I'd like to present supplemental documents. Evan nodded once. Proceed. Lane connected her tablet to the projector. In a second, the polished charts disappeared, replaced by something uglier, the risk matrix I had seen the day before. The room went silent. This spreadsheet, Lane said evenly, outlines a strategy to bypass Asian safety regulations by releasing non-compliant products. It includes calculated projections of consumer injuries and fatalities weighed against profit margins. The regulators leaned forward, their expressions dark. Murmurs rippled through the board. Marissa's smile faltered. This is a mistake. I've never seen that document before. Lane swiped to another screen. An email chain with Marissa's name in the sender field, discussing how to manage unfavorable test results. This can't be authentic, Marissa snapped. Someone has manipulated these files. The metadata confirms authenticity, Lane replied calmly, as do statements from 3 members of your team who cooperated with our inquiry. I glanced at the front row where Devin and another colleague sat. Devin stared at the table, refusing to look at her. The silence between them said everything. The boardroom air grew heavy. Graham's face was grim. The regulators whispered to each other, their voices sharp and urgent. Evan finally spoke. Miss Daniels. It took me a moment to realize he was addressing me. My legs felt like lead as I stood and walked to the front. Every eye in the room was on me. You raised concerns about these safety issues weeks ago, did you not? Graham asked. My throat was dry, but I forced my voice steady. Yes, I brought test results to Marissa directly. She dismissed them. I raised them again in the conference call with Regional Director Preston. The feed cut out before I could finish, and Marissa contradicted me. Afterwards, I received a threat on my car windshield telling me to keep quiet. Gasps rippled across the table. The regulators exchanged sharp looks. I continued. Yesterday, I was called into HR with a fabricated transcript accusing me of making inappropriate comments. That was the plan, to discredit me before I could expose what I'd found. Marissa stood abruptly, her voice sharp. This is character assassination. She's bitter. She's making things up. Lane cut her off. Then perhaps you can explain why your login credentials accessed these files repeatedly over the past 2 months. We have server logs. For the first time, Marissa had no words. Her face drained of color, and the silence was deafening. Evan's voice broke it. Security will escort Marissa and her associates out, effective immediately. The boardroom erupted in low voices. The regulators leaned in, demanding assurances. I just stood there, heart hammering, trying to process what had happened. As security moved forward, Marissa turned her head toward me. Her eyes burned with fury, but beneath it I saw something else. Fear. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something like relief. Not because it was over, but because the truth was finally out in the open. The boardroom emptied slowly, voices buzzing with shock and urgency. The regulators left with thick folders under their arms, their faces grim. Security escorted Marissa, Devin, and Kenzie down the hall. I watched them go in silence, my heart pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. For weeks I had been gaslit, undermined, and nearly destroyed. Now the lies were out in the open, and yet standing there I didn't feel triumphant. I felt drained. Lane approached me first. "You did well," she said quietly. I gave a shaky laugh. I thought my legs were going to give out. "They didn't," she replied. "That's what matters." Evan came over next, his expression unreadable. "Miss Daniels, your courage saved this company from catastrophe. The board will discuss next steps, but know this. Your integrity has been noticed." I nodded, unable to find words. The next few days were a blur. News spread quickly through the company. First whispers, then full-blown rumors. By the end of the week, everyone knew Marissa and her allies had been fired for misconduct. Departments that had once been tightly controlled by her circle now operated in uneasy silence. People avoided eye contact in hallways, unsure of who had been loyal to whom. HR called me back in, but this time there was no transcript, no accusation. Instead, Iris, her face stiff and pale, read from a prepared statement acknowledging that the complaint against me had been fabricated. She didn't apologize directly, but the humiliation in her voice was clear. I left the office that day with my head a little higher, but the relief didn't last long, because fallout, I realized, isn't clean. A week later, I got a call from my sister. "Lily, your name is in the business pages. Some article about corporate corruption. Your company's all over it." I opened the link and there it was. A piece about regulatory failures, whistleblowers, and corporate greed. My name wasn't printed, but enough detail was there for colleagues and industry insiders to guess. I read the comments section, saw strangers debating whether people like me were heroes or troublemakers. My stomach twisted. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the article, wondering if I'd ruined my future. Who would want to hire the woman who nearly brought her own company down? When I finally slept, my dreams were restless. The next morning, Lane appeared at my desk. "Board wants to see you." I followed her back upstairs, nerves buzzing. In the boardroom, Graham cleared his throat and gestured for me to sit. "Miss Daniels," he began, "the company owes you a debt. Your persistence prevented dangerous products from entering markets where lives would have been at risk. The board has voted unanimously to create a new division, International Compliance and Product Safety. We would like you to lead it." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. "Lead it?" "Yes," he said. "You'll report directly to the board. Independent of middle management. You'll have authority to review safety protocols across all regions. We believe you've proven yourself capable." My chest tightened. I don't know what to say. "Say yes," Evan said simply. I did. The weeks that followed were the hardest of my career. Rebuilding trust, reviewing mountains of data, facing skeptical managers who still saw me as a threat. But piece by piece, things shifted. I implemented anonymous reporting channels for employees. I set up quarterly audits with outside firms. And slowly, people began to understand that raising concerns wasn't career suicide anymore. One evening, months later, I sat in my new office overlooking the city. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You were right. I was wrong. I'm sorry, no signature, but I knew who it was. Marissa." I stared at the message for a long time, then set the phone down without replying. Some apologies come too late. That night, I went home and told my sister everything. She listened, then asked, "So, was it worth it?" I thought about the sleepless nights, the fear, the humiliation. I thought about the spreadsheet calculating lives against profit margins. I thought about the regulators who now supported us, and the young employees who quietly thanked me in hallways. Yes, I said finally. Some fights are worth having, even if you don't know how they'll end. Because in the end, it wasn't just about saving my job. It was about something bigger. The simple truth that integrity isn't expensive. It's priceless. And sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to stay silent,